It's preparing the stream, so we're not there yet. Okay. Right, and I usually would just give it a few minutes so people can come on. So we'll start about 12:06, right?
12:00.
06 in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Good afternoon, Nandi. Oh, sorry. Yes, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, Nandi. Okay, so Lorelai, are you ready?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
proceed.
All right. So good afternoon, all. Welcome to another episode of our Facebook Live series, Know Your Rights. Today, we'll be focusing on access to education for persons with disabilities. Of course, on Monday, we published a column with the same topic, and we will just dive into some more explanations. So you can ask your questions live here as well, and we will answer your question. It's meant to be an interactive session, so please feel free and leave your comments. Good afternoon, RK and Nicholas as well. Thank you for joining us. So I have with me here Lorelai Wong, and Lorelai is a legal officer one at the Equal Opportunity Commission, and she also specializes in disability at the commission. So Lorelai, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thanks, Charlie, for having me.
So the first question I want to ask you, Lorelai, is about the Equal Opportunity Act, and more or less the status grounds that are covered in the Act and
Mhm.
the four broad categories covered as well. I also want you, I know it's a three-part question, so bear with me, to tell us also when you're describing the statograms and the categories, to tell us more about disability and what it is according to the Equal Opportunity Act.
Okay, sure. So the Equal Opportunity Act, it was created in the year 2000, and the Equal Opportunity Commission was created by said act by virtue of Section 26. So what we basically do is we look at four broad categories of discrimination, and those are employment, education, the provision of goods and services, and the provision of accommodation. And for the purpose of today's session, we will look specifically at education and disability. So apart from the categories of discrimination, we have types of discrimination. Per the Equal Opportunity Act, we have 7 various types of discrimination, and those are race, ethnicity, religion, marital status, disability, sex, and origin, including geographical origin. So as Shelley would have mentioned to you all today, we're looking at disability, and disability has a specific definition per the Act, and it's found in the preamble of the Act, the preliminary section of the Act, and it states that, and I'm just going to read verbatim from the Act, it says that disability means a total or partial loss of a bodily function, a total or partial loss of a part of the body, a malfunction of a part of the body, including a mental or psychological disease or disorder, as well as a malformation or disfigurement of the parts of the body. So that's what the definition is per the Equal Opportunity Act.
Thanks, Lorelei. I really like that the definition covers not just physical disabilities, but mental disabilities. And hopefully we'll go into that a bit further in our chat today. But just to bring it back to our topic, disability in education, I want to ask point blank, how can schools offer a more accessible and inclusive environment for persons with disabilities?
All right, so when we talk about disability under the Equal Opportunity Act, what we specifically look at is something called reasonable accommodation. And reasonable accommodation is exactly what it is. You are making an accommodation for this specific person, but it has to be reasonable in nature. So when we look at reasonable accommodation, what accommodations can be made for this student with a disability at their school? So for example, we would look at, I'll give you an example. What if you're a student and you're a student with a disability, and your disability, for example, is a speech fluency disorder? If you have a speech fluency disorder, and for example, you may be in an examination type setting, and you need an accommodation that you may require from the institution is that you may need some extra time, because if you have stuttering problems, you won't be able to formulate a sentence immediately. So therefore, if you're on a time constraint basis, you would need extra time. So that's an accommodation that can be provided to you by the examiner or by the school itself. So those are just simply an explanation of how reasonable accommodation is used. Reasonable accommodation can also apply to a physical accommodation. For example, if you say your school, like certain schools, secondary schools, tertiary level schools, institutions have 3 levels or 4 levels, and you have a physical disability and cannot access the 3rd floor or 4th floor, a mere reasonable accommodation could be that on that specific day that you do have a class, the class can find its way to the ground floor to be able to allow for wheelchair access for you if you're using a cane, for example.
Yes. Okay. Lorelei, hold on a second. I'm seeing somebody asking, Mikey, you want the contact number for us? Our number is 672-0928. I'm just going to put it into chat for you as well. And I'll give you my personal extension number, right, which is 231. Right, so you can contact me and I will direct you from there. Okay, Lorelei, just back to the question that you just responded to. So let's say you go into school, you're in a wheelchair, or you have some sort of learning disability, and let's say they deny you access to that educational institution because of your disability. How would the person know that they were discriminated against? As in, what are the markers they're looking for, rather than it's something that can't be reasonably accommodated?
Right. So to be honest, Shelley, cases of discrimination on the whole, when we look at it at the commission, and because our process basically is to investigate complaints that are lodged with us based on discrimination. what we do is we look at cases on a case-by-case basis. We look at all the facts that are presented to us. So sometimes discrimination on the face of it may not be very clear, but obviously sometimes it can show itself in a very subtle way. And for example, if a person is trying to access a school and they have a physical disability or they have an intellectual disability, and the school is not accepting them, for example, entrance into the school. They can't be permitted to go to the school. They may say, well, it's because of your disability. Sometimes it may be expressed in the fact that the school might outright say that, we don't have the necessary teachers with the background into students with disabilities or intellectual disabilities to accommodate that specific student. But it is on another basis. So for example, when you lodge a complaint with us, it's only then when we are able to gather the evidence, go through the investigative process, and we're able to recognize whether or not there is a case of discrimination. Sometimes it's not clear, and that's why we may have to write to the educational institution or establishment. So that's what we will do. We will engage in a process. But if there is a clear, outright expressed a statement saying that, well, we're not taking you because of your disability, then they can come, the student with the disability or their parents on their behalf can come to the commission, and then we can look at the case from there.
Right, absolutely. And do you mind going into a bit more details, Lorelei, on how does one go about lodging a complaint at the EOC, and also what to expect from that process once they lodge the complaint?
All right, sure. So students with disabilities, for example, we will look at, they are also minors, and they can have a parent on their behalf lodge a complaint. If they're 18 years and older as well, they can lodge a complaint on their own, because education stems all the way from preschool straight on to tertiary level and further and beyond. Remember, it's both private and public establishments that we looked at, because the Equal Opportunity Act caters for recourse against both public sector and private sector. What we can look at is, firstly, and I must mention, and it must be mentioned at this point, that in order for you to lodge a complaint at the commission for yourself or on behalf of your child, you would need to make sure that the discriminatory act, which is if you say they didn't grant you entrance into school or accept your application, or you were denied while in the process of being in school some sort of benefit or opportunity during your during being in the establishment, you have to remember that based on a discriminatory act, you have 6 months in which to lodge a complaint. So from the alleged discriminatory act taking place, because that's the time limitation period posed by the Equal Opportunity Act. So let's say all those things are satisfied. When you come to the commission, you have to satisfy the category as mentioned before. So that's whether education, the employment, provision of goods, and provision of accommodation. And that specific category of discrimination must now correlate to a type of discrimination. And in this case, we are talking about disability. So we will go with, it is an education, it satisfies that category. And in the type of discrimination is based on a person's disability. So for example, when they lodge a complaint using our online services or our in-person services, you can access the forms online. You can also complete, I believe, a form online, and it's submitted through the portal itself, as well as fill out a hard copy form at the offices or drop it off. And you can attach your necessary documents and evidence together with the form and submit it to the commission's offices. When that is done, the matter will then be assigned to the legal unit, and both an investigating officer and a legal officer will be assigned to that specific matter. Once you meet the minimum requirements of the category and the type of discrimination, then we will make a decision after reviewing all the facts presented to us to write to the respondent. The respondent to the matter would now be the educational establishment that you are complaining against. And we'll put forward the allegations made by you, who is considered to be a complainant in the matter. When we get the information gathered from you, we pose questions stating that we have received a complaint from so-and-so, and we are now trying to go through investigative process to determine whether or not some form of discrimination actually took place. So we would write to them and we would give them an opportunity to respond within 1 month to us. We'll usually ask about 20-something questions based on the facts, present all the allegations put forward, and await a response. And the process of going through waiting a response, when we do receive the response at the end of the month, we would call in the complainants to view the response. And it's an investigative process. So we go back and forth until we find out all the information that we need to find out. And then at that point in time, we are in a better position to determine where the matter can go forward to, whether the matter goes forward to the Equal Opportunity Tribunal or it ends with the commission at the conciliation process.
Yes, I also want to add as well, Lorelai, thank you very much for that. I also want to add that our services are free of charge to members of the public, right? So up until the stage of conciliation, which is what the commission is responsible for. So we receive, investigate, and conciliate, right? That entire process is free of charge. And also just to reiterate the information that Lorelai just gave in terms of how you can access us to lodge a complaint, you can go to our website, which is www.equalopportunity.gov.tt. You can call our offices. You can probably get some advice before you lodge that complaint if you like. Our legal department, Laura, I'm putting you on the spot. Our legal department is happy to receive those calls as well. The number is in the comment section. You can also send in your complaints to complaints@eoc.gov.tt, right? Yeah, and you can also mail in as well. Our offices, we opened our physical office space on Monday, right? So we will be here to receive your mail as well if you want to lodge in person, right? So Laura,
I
sorry.
just like to say, sorry to interject. Yes, as Shirley would have mentioned, we have reopened the physical office. So we do welcome visitors, but we prefer appointments because given the whole COVID-19 situation, I mean, it may be better for both you and the staff that, you book an appointment so an officer can be available to take a meeting with you at some point in time. So when you call our offices, they will assign you to the legal department, and that can be sorted out for you as well.
Yes, thank you, Laura, because we were using these mechanisms when we were working from home. So we encourage you to continue doing so. Good afternoon, Julio. Good afternoon, Leon. I'm seeing a question from Leon Bain. I am not certain if it falls under disability, but I will ask it anyway, Lorelai, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you're a man but you identify as a woman and you were denied entry to an all-girls school, do you have any rights in a case like this?
So you identify as a man?
You identify you're a man, but you identify as a woman, and you were denied entry to an all-girls school.
So that's a pretty broad question, and it leads into the issue of gender. And it also, because that's a social construct, and we now are becoming more and more aware of these types of situations. In that case, what I would say to you, the act actually caters for, and we're not talking about disability or anything, this is an issue relating to gender. You remember that the Equal Opportunity Act is very constrained to the 7 status grounds that I would have mentioned to you, whereas you realize that it's in the act itself, it's explicitly states that sexual orientation is not under the grounds. There has been calls for, proposed amendments and reform to the Equal Opportunity Act. But at this point in time, for example, in other jurisdictions and international jurisdictions where there are, let's just say, there are persons who may be male identifying as female and vice versa, and then there are persons who are actually transsexuals and transgendered persons who have something called gender recognition certificates and so forth. Those persons have those accommodations available to them in their jurisdiction, but Trinidad and Tobago has not, at this point in time, have any legislation in place to facilitate these sorts of requests for persons who may identify as female and trying to access a school. What I would say is, and specific to our act, one of the exemptions under the act where it may not be discriminatory, it's in the issue of same-sex. So it's same-sex schools. For example, they're all female schools and they're all male schools. So if a school denies you access because you're a male, whether or not you identify as female, that's an exemption in the act that specifically states it will not be discriminatory per the Equal Opportunity Act, because it would fall within the exemption catered for in that specific clause.
Yes, absolutely. So another example is, let's say, an all-girls school. Sometimes they would require that teachers be female only, right? So the act makes provisions for situations like that. Also, Lorelai, just to piggyback off of what you were saying earlier, the Equal Opportunity Commission one of our functions is to keep under the review the Equal Opportunity Act and make recommendations to the
Yeah.
Attorney General to amend the act. So sexual orientation is actually one of the recommendations we made for the act to be amended to include this as a status ground. Right. So hopefully we see some movements on that, but it was a recommendation made by the commission. Right. So I hope that answers your question, Leon. Thank you for your question. Let's get and of course, just a reminder that you can continue asking questions, and we'd be happy. Lorelai would be happy to respond. Just to get back on topic here, Lorelai, because we're actually supposed to be winding down in about 10 minutes or so. Right, just to get back on topic. How crucial is teacher training and support for students with disabilities? And can you give us some examples of what type of training they should have access to?
Sure. So a lot of times why you may tend to see discrimination in accessing education for persons with disabilities is because schools already turn you away for the mere fact that they don't have that human resource who are actually qualified to handle persons with disabilities. And remember, bear in mind that disabilities vary in type. So there are intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, there are mental disabilities, and others, right? And at the end of it, you have to realize that, for example, simply persons with sensory disabilities, they may have a harder time at an educational establishment. And essentially, the school will turn you away. So if it is that our institutions at a tertiary level, there are more programs. There are currently programs specific to special needs, and they are now, I believe, at the university level, UE as well as UTT. I think there are master programs as well that allow teachers to undertake courses to deal with students with special needs. So they come out into doing special education aids and so forth. It's very critical because you have to realize that a person with a disability, be it what type of disability, may need an extra some extra help, some extra care, extra support. And it's something called positive discrimination, whereas these persons who are already considered to be a part of a vulnerable community, they do need that extra attention. So it's positive discrimination, where you allow a teacher to go through the training process to see how to handle the situation, as well as through the Ministry of Education and their Student Support Services Division that was set up specifically to allow the Ministry of Education to realize where their early developmental, you could pick up from early developmental stages that a student may have a learning disorder, a learning disability, for example. They may have dyslexia, or you can realize that somebody is on the spectrum at an early age. So you want to have all these teachers who may be able to say that I'm sitting in a classroom with all of these students. I can pinpoint a student who may have a more difficult time. Not having a more difficult time doesn't necessarily mean that a student has a disability, but the teacher can then pay more specific attention to that student and say, well, look at their progress. So they have to look at how it progresses throughout the time the student is there with them in that year or in that term. You can see if there's a sort of pattern, and they'll be able to formulate whether or not the student needs some sort of special needs assistance. And the care given, obviously, care is something very important. Remember, again, when we look at students with disabilities, and especially younger students as well, but all in all, parents as well may not be able or properly equipped to deal with students. A lot of parents, the stigma against persons with disabilities is, if somebody tells you that my child has dyslexia, no parent wants to hear my child have dyslexia. So you now have to formulate some sort of care and support system for parents who are accepting of it, and also for where parents are not accepting of that. You would have to now say, how can we get support for both parents and students? Because on top of that, the student himself with his disability may have a more difficult time being in an environment where the environment was not catered for persons, specifically for persons with disabilities. Basically, what they did is they are now integrated into an environment where students are all without disabilities, and they alone may feel a stigma against them and feel discriminated in a setting such as that. So care and support is very, very important. It goes beyond just the teaching method. It goes further than that.
Yes, that is so true. And to be honest, there are some passionate teachers out there.
Yeah.
And they give that extra care, and they go the extra mile to make
see
sure.
That as well too, Shelley. More so during COVID, we have been able to see teachers going above and beyond
Yeah.
to facilitate all of their students. So yeah.
Definitely kudos to the teachers out there. If you have any teachers tuning in, just you are amazing people.
Yeah.
I think we have some more time, right, to touch a few more questions, Lorelai. So we spoke about teachers and you briefly mentioned parents as well, right? Because we
Mhm.
know the students would be in a circle or a network, right?
Right.
So how important is it to how important is support for students and
Mhm.
even further for parents or guardians of children with disabilities?
Yeah, I believe at some point in time, the Ministry of Education, in the establishment of their inclusive education policy, had discussions about it, talking about getting cohesion from all parties involved. Remember, it's the Ministry of Education, the teacher, the student themselves, but not forgetting that a parent is also involved. And I believe that they had decided to partner with parents to make the child's life a little more easy, a lot easier, sorry, in any transition. Because for example, if they are not, if they don't belong to a special needs school, like, for example, the National Center for Persons with Disabilities, or the school, if somebody's deaf and they have the school for hearing in Marabella, I believe. If you have a child with a disability, a learning disability, in an everyday regular school, it will be difficult. It will be very difficult, and parent support is very much needed. A child needs to know that they're taken care of in the school as well as home. So whatever they come with from home is how their behavior it will be at school as well. So support needs to be an all-around thing. It doesn't stop when you leave school, and it doesn't stop when you leave home either. So it's very, very important that there is, I would say that if you know that your child has a special needs, that the parents always try to maintain a very, very good rapport with the teacher, to know that make sure my child is able to get a quality education, effective learning. So that's what we want. We want to make them feel like they are part of something. They need that effective learning, because learning is just not regular for them. They go at different levels, different stages. Some may be more advanced. For instance, as you see me with autism, are way advanced compared to students who may not have autism. So it all goes on different levels, and we have to make sure that accommodation from all parties are given to the students.
Absolutely. I love that response because it's pointing to creating a safe space for students at home and at school to foster learning.
Definitely.
So that definitely. Lorelai, in our column on Monday and
Mhm.
in our previous columns, like yeah, 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
column online newsday, we spoke about the need for inclusivity for persons with disabilities in all spheres. But we specifically spoke about the workplace, right? So in
Right.
order to truly access the
Mhm.
talent that's available in this country, we
Yeah.
have to include people with disabilities, right? So and we spoke about it not just being a social argument, but a business argument as well,
Yeah.
right? So they need to have people with diverse backgrounds that they bring different things to the table, and of course there
Mhm.
are statistics to support this as well,
Yeah.
right? But
Mhm.
I wanted to bring it to education, right? So in terms of inclusivity, can you give me some details on the need for inclusive education opportunities?
Right. So, as we were talking about, and I don't think we mentioned it before, when we were looking at the issue of reasonable accommodation as well, accommodations can be made, remember, based on the type of disability. And I'll just mention this here. So permit me if I take a little longer, Shelley. We have Tobago has signed on to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and we ratified in 2015. We are also a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of a Child. And all of these conventions have one thing in mind, that we have to ensure that these persons, these vulnerable persons, are looked after. And it's a state, and we have something called state actors. So the signatory itself, the government of Tobago, has to ensure that things are put into place to allow for non-discrimination against these persons. Bringing it back to education, when we talk about reasonable accommodation for these persons, and I was just saying today that, like if, for example, a student who is who is currently a student there, and they may need some sort of medication, or they may have asthma attacks, and they may need to use Ventolin or inhaler, and they may need time off. What about students who may need dialysis, for example, and need a request for time off? These are simple, reasonable accommodations that can be made. again, it has to be reasonable. So for example, when we talk about reasonable accommodation, we also look at something called undue financial hardship, meaning that we look at specifically at the word reasonable. Reasonable means that you cannot put, for example, an employer, an educational establishment through an undue financial hardship to accommodate a person with a disability. But that doesn't mean that an employer or an establishment, educational establishment, gets away without trying to make an accommodation. Again, it must be reasonable in the sense, not to pose that undue financial hardship or burden.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that, Lorelai. Earlier you mentioned that there are different types of disabilities that students can have, be it physical or learning disability, right? And you mentioned that there are some hidden disabilities. So
Mm-hmm.
could you just go into a little bit more details about what is a hidden disability?
Sure. So, for example, when you hear disability, the first thing a lot of people think somebody using a wheelchair, somebody using a cane. They all automatically their head goes to physical disabilities. However, hidden disabilities are disabilities that you really cannot see on the surface. It's not available to the eye. So it's mental disabilities, sensory disabilities, neurological disabilities, psychological disabilities. So, for example, things like autism, dyslexia, paranoid schizophrenia, all these are different types of disabilities that may not outrightly show themselves until a situation arises, for example. So it's not, you can look at me right now and think I don't have a disability, but I may. And one example that we usually use in our public education sessions is that persons who wear glasses, similar to you, Shelley, that's a disability to an extent, right? Be proud of it, but it is. So because again, based on the definition of what we look at, there's some sort of compromise. If you didn't have glasses, would you be able to see? Is it that by straining your eyes, you eventually become visually impaired? So all of these things may be hidden, for example, so it's not regularly seen. And what we do is we have to be cognizant of that. We have to be aware that, for example, you may at some point in time, because we're such a small country, come into contact with a person who may not seem or may not be acting in a way that is normal to you. But that doesn't mean that the first thing that you're going to say is that this person crazy or mad. That's not what we should do. We should try to, deter from using terms like that as well. But we are so accustomed in enormous societies to go saying a person mad or crazy. But these persons probably have a disability that you may not be aware about. And then that's how the stigma and discrimination arises. You start to treat that person less favorably because they're not similar to you, they're not normal to you.
Yes, that's a very good point. Thank you for that, Lorelai. By the way, I'm going to do a shameless plug right now. Lorelai and myself, we will be appearing on 91.1 FM on Friday at 11:15, and we will be talking about we'll be addressing the blind community and how they can access the EOC for redress. So, Lorelai, we went over time a little bit, but I think definitely was with it. And I definitely think we have to invite you to come back to speak about not just disabilities in education, but in other areas as well. So thank you so much for being here, Lorelai. It was a pleasure.
Thank
And
you.
and thank you to those that came in and did and asked your questions as well. So we will close off the session now. And of course, if you have any questions beyond today's session, you can send them in to us. You can send it to communications@euc.gov.tt, and we will be happy to respond and assist you where we can. You're welcome, Arki. He said good info. Thank you. So we close off, and until next time, everybody take care and be safe.